For several months in 2024, a severe drought caused major congestion at the Panama Canal. The intense heat and lack of rainfall led to the water levels in the canal dropping to their lowest point ever. As a result, Panama had to allow fewer ships to pass through, triggering a chain reaction of delays, increasing shipping costs, and raising concerns about the future of the canal. Which is, by the way, one of the world's most critical trade hubs. This disruption also impacted the global shipping industry. About 5% of global maritime trade passes through the Panama Canal, which is also a gateway for 40% of containerized cargo to and from the United States. But I won't go into too much detail about what's happening with the Panama Canal. If anyone's interested, we made a separate video about it. But I'll focus on the alternatives instead. Yes, alternatives to the Panama Canal may actually appear, and China plays a big role in their creation. What's China got to do with all this? Well, let me tell you over a cup of coffee. But first, let's make it. An unobtrusive reminder to do something under the video, and thanks only to those you know what for. So the first alternative is the Interoceanic Corridor in Mexico. You've probably heard about it, and that's no surprise. First of all, because I've already talked about this corridor. Well, and second, because it's an unprecedented infrastructure project that's impossible to miss. The corridor is being built in the narrowest part of Mexico between the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans, and it's expected to have a significant impact on the country's economy and regional development in the future. The project's a stretch of land 188 miles long that'll connect the ports of Salina Cruz and Oaxaca with Coatzacoalcos in Veracruz. The stretch will include 2 deep sea ports, railroads, highways, 3 airports, a pipeline, and a fiber optic network. According to experts, the project will allow for the transport of 1.4 million containers per year and may even be more economical and faster than the Panama Canal. By the way, some parts of the project are already up and running, but it's expected to be fully completed by the first half of 2026. To be honest, I just brought up the corridor in Mexico for the sake of courtesy. What really interests me is a different alternative. And this is the Nicaraguan Canal, estimated at $40 billion. It's also supposed to connect the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, and at the same time put an end to the chaos in shipping and the congestion in the Panama Canal. In short, it's the very alternative we all so desperately need. It's expected that the canal will divide Lake Nicaragua, the largest lake in Central America, in half. Since the idea of the canal was first brought up, everyone's been saying in unison that it'll be one of the biggest civil engineering projects in history, and the Panama Canal will look like a dwarf compared to the new one. About 167 miles long, it'll handle large container ships and tankers that simply can't fit through Panama. Actually, the idea of creating this canal isn't exactly new. At one point, the Americans were already thinking about something like that. This map is dated 1870 and shows the proposed route for the shortest shipping path between the oceans. However, after buying French stocks in the Panama Canal at the beginning of the 20th century, the U.S. decided to give up on the Nicaragua project, even though they had obtained rights and conducted research for such a project. In the end, the U.S. Congress decided to build the canal in Panama, but too much has changed since then, so it's time to think again about a canal through Nicaragua. What's more, it promises to be 3 times longer and twice as deep as the Panama Canal. They're also promising to build 2 major port facilities, one at each end of the project, hydroelectric stations, and a number of other parts of the project. So overall, it's an incredibly exciting, huge, and complex engineering project, and it costs a ton of money. Some say the amount could actually reach up to $100 billion. But wait, what does China have to do with all this? I mean, where is it, and where's Nicaragua? The Grand Nicaraguan Canal project made headlines in 2013 after a mysterious Chinese billionaire in telecommunications, Wang Jing, struck a deal with the Nicaraguan government worth $50 billion. The concession, meaning a contract for the construction of the canal for 50 years, was granted to the Hong Kong-based company HK Nicaragua Canal Development Investment, which is owned by Wang Jing. We'll talk about why China wants the canal later, but for now, let's break down the benefits for Nicaragua. First of all, according to the country's government, the canal will create tens of thousands of jobs and boost the economy. This makes sense since the Panama Canal works exactly like that. According to President Daniel Ortega, the Nicaraguan Canal should lift the country out of poverty and set it on the path to development. And it's worth mentioning here that Nicaragua is on the list of the poorest countries in the world. In the 2024 ranking, Global Finance placed the country at 58th in the overall poverty list. The GDP per capita in Nicaragua was $8,137. For comparison, the USA is at 182nd place with a GDP of $85,373 per capita, and Panama is at 142nd place with a GDP of $44,797 per capita. Among the countries of North and South America, Nicaragua ranks second in terms of poverty, right after Haiti. So, a canal in the country could definitely make a difference, especially considering that it promises to double the GDP. It's still small compared to other countries, but definitely better than what they have now. However, despite the obvious benefits, the project has sparked a lot of debate and controversy. There are people who are strongly against the construction of the canal. Some of them, for example, fear that the canal will take away their land and livelihoods. What's more, a law has been passed giving the project the right to forcibly seize land and water routes anywhere in Nicaragua. According to the plan, they want to forcibly relocate 120,000 people. Anyone would be alarmed by something like that. Thousands of Nicaraguan farmers protested against land confiscation aimed at paving the way for a government-backed project. In 2019, a Nicaraguan judge sentenced 3 farmer leaders to 216, 210, and 159 years in prison. They were accused of aiding a failed coup against the government. In fact, anger over the canal project was one of the first triggers of growing public discontent with Ortega's government, which led to mass protests in 2018. But it's not just about the farmers and the blow to agriculture. It looks like creating the canal will lead to the depletion of the country's most important freshwater reserves and the destruction of protected nature areas. And by the way, 22 endangered species live there. For example, the jaguar will suffer. Its population, like those of other mammals in Central America, will be split in two by the canal. Biologists say that fragmentation is the enemy of biodiversity. Every time you fragment or isolate a population, you shrink it and interrupt the flow of genes. There are also indigenous tribes living in this area. According to the Center for World Indigenous Studies, around 10,000 indigenous Nicaraguans were killed in attempts to defend their lands and way of life. It sounds terrible. But knowing this, the approval of the Mega Canal project in 2013 didn't come as a surprise to many. The thing is, 52% of the project approved by the government will have to go through the territories of indigenous peoples, including the lands of the Mosquito, Rama, and Rama Creole communities. Given the history of relations between the tribes and the government, this will only make the situation worse. Critics say that the project will not only lead to the displacement of indigenous communities from their lands, but also impact wetlands and forests, which are vital for their survival. We're talking about Lake Nicaragua, the largest lake in Central America. It serves as the water source for all Nicaraguans, but more importantly, it's a food source for the indigenous communities living on its shores. Now follow the logic. Since the lake is too shallow for supertankers to pass through, it'll need to be dredged, which will destroy the lake's bottom, pollute the water, and harm the species living there. Also, opening the lake to the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans will trigger an influx of invasive species. This will threaten the survival of local fish and could have devastating effects on the local ecosystem. After that, it may never recover. Besides everything else, experts are worried about how quickly the research into all the consequences was done. The research was indeed carried out, but in just 1.5 years, while similar smaller-scale projects usually take much longer to review. Just to give you an idea, the sea level canal through Panama proposed in the 1970s required 10 years to determine its ecological feasibility, and then it was canceled. Another example is the Three Gorges Dam project in China, which was smaller in scale than the Nicaraguan canal. The dam was built, although the environmental study was also rushed. Now experts claim that the Three Gorges Dam project has become a prime example of unforeseen ecological costs. The dam suffers from everything, from frequent landslides to water pollution, and even increased seismic activity. This could have been avoided if more thorough and lengthy research had been done before construction. Unfortunately, no one did that. Experts are now repeatedly stressing that when building the canal in Nicaragua, they need to consider larger regional impacts, not just the construction zone. They also express serious concern about the lack of data on water quality and the flow of the canal, which will pass through Lake Nicaragua. And let's not forget, this is a source of fresh water. But what's the deal with China? Well, now's a good time to take a look at the Panama Canal. Every year, up to 14,000 ships pass through it, using the canal to avoid a long and expensive journey around South America. The Panama Canal cuts down the time needed to ship goods from Shenzhen, China to the east coast of the U.S. or between San Francisco and New York by several weeks. Although the analysis shows that the U.S. remains its main user, it's China that's actively involved in infrastructure projects around the waterway, and in recent years, China's influence has been growing. This happened after Panama joined the Belt and Road Initiative in 2017. As part of this initiative, Beijing is investing in infrastructure all over the world, including around the canal. However, Panama recently pulled out of the partnership under pressure from the U.S. But most of the U.S.'s displeasure was focused on China's control over the ports, which had been around long before the Belt and Road Initiative. What is this about? Let me explain. There are 5 container ports around the Panama Canal, and all of them are owned by foreign companies. The 3 main ports of the canal, Cologne, Rodman, and Manzanillo, are run by companies from Singapore, Taiwan, and the U.S. However, the main focus of the states is on the 2 largest, Cristobal and Balboa. They're located at both ends of the canal and have been operated since 1997 by a subsidiary of Hong Kong's C.K. Hutchison Holdings. Yes, this company is a private corporation based outside mainland China, but experts say that the national security law adopted by China in 2020 could allow China to influence companies, in case of a conflict between countries, of course. That's where the idea came from that says in any potential global conflict, China might use strategic regional ports to restrict access for American naval and commercial ships. Meanwhile, while the U.S. focus was on Balboa and Cristobal, Chinese companies got involved in projects in other places around the canal, and one large bridge project caught my attention in particular. Look, right now, 3 bridges cross the Panama Canal at different points: the Atlantic Bridge, the Centennial Bridge, and the Bridge of the Americas. And just a little north of the last one, a Chinese corporation is building a new 4th bridge connecting Panama City with western Panama. Satellite images from the past year show that the bridge construction is sped up. This is January 2025, and this is March 2024. The deal, which according to the news agency Reuters is worth about $1.42 billion, has raised concerns among American officials. Yes, because of the involvement of Chinese companies in the project. Republican Senator Ted Cruz even said that the partially completed bridge gives China the ability to block the canal without warning, but didn't explain how. In his view, this could actually happen. In response to the accusations, Chinese officials deny having any interest in violating Panama's sovereignty or pursuing their own agenda against Washington. Anyway, according to the Ministry of Public Works of Panama, it's expected that the bridge will speed up daily traffic for more than 70,000 vehicles, benefiting 1.7 million people. As of today, reportedly, only 17 to 18% of the work has been completed, and the cause is, of course, a good one. But why does China need this? First, it's important to bring up the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative, often referred to as the New Silk Road. The project was initially intended to connect East Asia and Europe with physical infrastructure, but over the last decade, it's expanded to Africa, Oceania, and Latin America. So far, 147 countries, making up 2/3 of the global population and 40% of the world's GDP, have joined the project or expressed interest in it. Of course, all this only expands China's economic influence. Plus, the Belt and Road Initiative structure provides an alternative market for large Chinese state-owned companies beyond the country's borders. It's no surprise that China's been working for years on building connections and influence in Panama. It's all part of an ambitious plan to strengthen its presence in Latin America. China has had some success with this. Among the major Chinese projects is the Amador Cruise Terminal built by China Harbor Engineering on the Pacific side of the canal. Also worth mentioning is the expansion of the Panama City Metro managed by China Railway Tunnel Group. These projects reflect some of China's interests around the canal, but Panama's authorities have postponed several others, also led by China. Eddie Tapiero, an economist from Panama, said that, in his opinion, about 50% of projects initiated after Panama joined the Belt and Road Initiative have been canceled or put on hold. In 2022, for example, a major project to create a new port on Margarita Island on the Caribbean side of the canal was canceled. The high-speed rail line project across the country from Panama City to David in the west was also shelved after the government change. And even the plan to build a new Chinese embassy on the Amador Causeway Islands located at the canal gates was canceled in 2018. By the way, experts suggest that China's influence on infrastructure has mostly grown to fill the gap left by the U.S.-American companies are often either uninterested or uncompetitive in tender processes compared to Chinese ones, which are often willing to offer funding when looking for deals. And this is not just the opinion of experts. Statistics on foreign direct investment, the amount of money one country invests in another, paint a similar picture. In 2023, China invested $1.4 billion in Panama, 4 times more than since the launch of the Belt and Road Initiative in 2017. At the same time, U.S. investments, while overall much higher, have decreased over the same period. According to the Panama Canal Management Company, from October 2023 to September 2024, 21% of the goods passing through the waterway were to and from China. However, the U.S. remains Panama's largest investor and the top user of the canal. No one can catch up with them yet. The gap's just too big. For instance, last year, 3.5 times more goods passed through the canal to and from the U.S. than to and from China. But what about Nicaragua? China's clearly interested in building a waterway through the country. China has the money, the experience in investing, and even experience with mega projects. However, almost 10 years after the start of the controversial plan to build the canal, Nicaragua canceled the concession granted to the Chinese businessman. The deal was terminated. This happened in May 2024. What's more, despite the symbolic groundbreaking back in 2014, no real work was done at the site of the future canal. Actually, at some point, crews began digging access roads near the canal, but they never got around to building the waterway itself. The biggest news in the past few days is that I cleaned the couch from Lent. More China presence. Is there really room for more Chinese influence? But as I've said before, China's presence around the world is growing and growing fast. In just a couple of decades, China's gone from being a minor player to a dominant force in Latin America, one so big that it stands side by side with the US and the European Union. Now forecasts suggest that by 2035, China could even overtake the US and become Latin America's most important trade partner. China's been the main trading partner of South America for quite some time now. For those who don't know, let me explain. This region is strategically important for the future of the global economy due to its abundance of resources and critical raw materials like lithium and copper. Given the push for electrification and reducing emissions, lithium and copper are especially valued right now. At the same time, alongside maintaining economic ties with Latin America and the Caribbean, China's also strengthening its political relations with the region through various forums. Remember the Belt and Road Initiative? Well, another recent example of Chinese strategic investments in the region is the Chancay megaport in Peru. It was developed by COSCO Shipping Ports Chancay Peru S.A., a corporation created by the Chinese state-owned shipping and logistics giant COSCO Shipping Ports. The first phase of the port was completed by the end of 2024. The port was officially opened on November 14, 2024, during a ceremony attended by Chinese leader Xi Jinping and Peruvian President Dina Boluarte. Naturally, there's been a lot of talk about the port's dual purpose and the fact that China could use it for its own interests in the event of a conflict, but what we're focusing on is something different. Experts say that at first, the port will be able to handle about 1 million containers annually, and then as I understand it, they plan to expand it. This could become a turning point in Latin American logistics as it would redirect trade between Latin America and Asia, bypassing the Atlantic and the Panama Canal. Buying the island. The Chinese Belt and Road Initiative is actively changing the face of Central America, and not least of all in El Salvador, where several projects are currently underway. For example, it's China that's helping El Salvador build a new national library, and some news sources claim that this is happening under the strictest secrecy. However, it's not entirely clear how you can hide the fact that a new building's being constructed right in the middle of the historic center. But in reality, this is not about the library. A few years ago, China showed interest in buying an entire island off the coast of El Salvador. A Chinese company was proposing to build a deep water port and an industrial zone there. Then 2 years ago, this caused a lot of anger in the US, and the project had to be put on hold for a while. But recently it became clear that the project is moving forward. At least China's come back to its offers. U.S. intelligence and military experts say the port project will give China a strong strategic base in what's long been an American area of influence. And naturally, that's got the U.S. concerned because they view the opening of ports as an opportunity for China to station its fleet. Officials and reporters refer to the island purchase, which is still pending, and the port construction as one of many examples of how China is making its power and influence felt across Latin America and the Caribbean. But it's not just the military consequences that worry the officials. According to them, China is rapidly moving towards its goal of economic dominance in Central and South America over the next decade, and that makes everyone anxious. Well, except for China, probably. The power of wind. On February 25, 2025, representatives from Nicaragua's Ministry of Energy and Mines and the state-owned company China Communications Construction signed a sort of historic document, a credit facility agreement for the El Barro wind energy project. It's planned that this El Barro project, with a capacity of 55 megawatts, will be carried out in the northern department of Esteli, and according to the authorities, it's a very important initiative as it'll take electricity production to a whole new level. By the way, the location was chosen for a reason. The region is located at an altitude of about 2,600 feet above sea level, and it's pretty windy there. Since returning to power 18 years ago, the government has supported the development of the energy sector using renewable sources. This makes Nicaragua one of the Central American countries that has invested the most in this area. Meanwhile, official data shows that in 2007, the electricity coverage rate in Nicaragua was just 54%, the lowest in the region. However, thanks to the efforts of the executive branch, the country has surpassed Costa Rica in this indicator and now holds first place with a rate of 99.5%. All that's left is to boost electricity production from renewable resources, and things will be really great. And that's where the El Barro project is supposed to help. Well, let's wish you good luck. You owe me a like. See you later.